There exists a compelling explanation for why you've consumed countless books, absorbed every instructional video, and recited endless affirmations before your reflection, yet something within you remains unloved. Something within you suffers in quietude. You rarely discuss this reality. You've perfected the expression, the bearing, the existence that appears organized, but during nighttime hours or within those silent transitional instances, the inquiries resurface. What causes this sense of isolation? Why does love seem perpetually beyond grasp, like a vision I've been assured exists but never genuinely experienced? Here lies the harsh yet liberating reality, one that Carl Jung comprehended with disturbing precision. You remain unloved, not because you're performing externally, but because you've banished aspects of yourself internally. As long as you stay divided, the love you draw will only ever reach the pieces, never the entirety. This represents the pain you experience, the pain of partial visibility, of conditional acceptance, of selection solely for the facade you present, never for the complete range of your identity. This isn't your responsibility. You were instructed to conceal, to adjust, to believe that being lovable meant being pleasant, silent, efficient, remarkable, gentle, accommodating. Not excessive, not overly sensitive, not angry, not chaotic. Consequently, you interred your authenticity in exchange for relationships that felt secure but never satisfying. You labeled it love, but it was merely survival. Carl Jung declared, life's greatest privilege is becoming your authentic self, but becoming your authentic self isn't a straightforward journey. It's a removal process, a homecoming, a confrontation with every aspect of yourself you've been conditioned to desert. The reason you're not genuinely loved yet isn't because love has forsaken you. It's because you've forsaken yourself. As long as you continue banishing your shadows, your passion, your neediness, your anxieties, your longings, you will unconsciously attract individuals who reflect your disconnection. You'll desire intimacy, yet sabotage it, yearn for acceptance, yet repel it, because what you reject internally will always manifest externally. Consider the individual you couldn't stop obsessing over, the one who made you feel inadequate, diminished, insecure. Was it truly them? Or was it what they awakened within you, what they reflected back that you hadn't yet reconciled with? That's the reflection. Every attraction, every trigger, every moment of emotional turmoil isn't random. It's a revelation of your inner landscape, of the aspects still unhealed, of the self you've refused to fully reclaim. This is where transformation begins, when you stop questioning, why don't they love me as I need, and start questioning, which parts of me have I still not accepted? Because love isn't something you obtain. It's something you encounter, something that resonates. And it can only truly resonate with you when you've made peace with every aspect of your being. Jung didn't instruct people how to discover love. He taught them how to discover themselves. When you find yourself, the right people stop feeling so distant, not because the world changed, but because your frequency did. You begin noticing who depletes you and who energizes you. You start feeling the distinction between chemistry based on trauma and chemistry based on truth. You start realizing that some individuals you pursued weren't meant to remain. They were meant to awaken, to shake loose the layers, to show you where your worth still depended on performance, to remind you where you still abandoned yourself for the illusion of connection. When you awaken to this, you stop blaming them, stop waiting for closure, stop rehearsing the past, and start reclaiming the present. You begin sitting with yourself, not the curated self, but the raw, unfiltered, aching self, and you begin listening not to fix, not to improve, but to witness. That witnessing, that's where love begins. The truth is, you cannot be truly loved if you are not truly known, and you cannot be truly known if you keep hiding behind personas built for acceptance. Jung called this persona a mask for the collective, a necessary interface, yes, but dangerous when mistaken for the self. Many of us have confused our masks with our identities. We've forgotten what it feels like to be loved for our essence because we've buried it so deep we've stopped loving it ourselves. So how do you return? How do you show up as your whole self when the world has rewarded you for the opposite? It begins with radical self-confrontation, noticing your patterns without judgment, sitting in your triggers and asking what they're trying to teach you, watching who you become when you feel rejected and choosing not to abandon yourself there. It begins by turning toward the shadow, not to banish it but to integrate it, to see the parts you once labeled as unlovable as the very keys to your liberation. Your anger isn't the enemy, it's your protector. Your neediness isn't weakness, it's your longing for intimacy. Your jealousy isn't proof of your smallness, it's the wounded part of you that still believes love is scarce. These aren't flaws, these are signposts. When you follow them inward, they lead you back to the wholeness that was never lost, only forgotten. The irony is that once you stop trying to be lovable, you become magnetic, not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've embodied yourself. You've stopped outsourcing your worth to those who can't hold it. You've stopped filtering your essence to fit someone else's comfort zone. You've stopped performing and started being. In that being, you attract people who don't just tolerate your truth. They resonate with it because they too have walked the path inward. They too have faced their shadows. They too are no longer looking for someone to complete them, but to meet them. When two whole people meet, love stops being a transaction. It becomes an expansion, a sacred mirror, a space where both light and shadow are welcomed, where wounds are not judged but held, where growth is not demanded but inspired. This is the kind of love you've been searching for, but it doesn't live in someone else's arms. It begins in your own. So no, the reason you're not truly loved yet is not because you are broken. It's because you are still hiding. But now you know, and knowing gives you a choice. Will you continue to perform, to perfect, to pursue love as if it's something outside of you? Or will you begin the only journey that ever truly matters, the one inward, the one Jung mapped out, the one where every step toward your shadow is a step toward your soul? Your answer is your life. When you choose the inward path, everything begins to shift. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you're no longer fragmented within it. You begin to see clearly that the people you've loved most were never meant to complete you. They were mirrors. Those mirrors, whether soft or sharp, were never lying. They were showing you everything you had disowned, every wound you refused to look at, every trait you tried to bury, every part of your essence that went unloved inside of you. They weren't your salvation, they were your reflection. This realization hits hard because it means the pain wasn't betrayal, it was revelation. It means they didn't reject you. They simply couldn't find the real you because you weren't showing up as them. You were showing up as an echo of your conditioning, as a version of yourself built to be accepted, not to be known. No one can truly love a version of you that you don't even love yourself. So you begin to unlearn, slowly, quietly, sometimes painfully. You start recognizing how often you silence yourself to keep the peace, how often you apologize for your truth to remain in someone's good graces, how often you pretend not to care just so you don't seem too needy, how often you deny your instincts just to seem agreeable. Then you realize that every time you do that, every time you shrink, every time you mold yourself for someone else's comfort, you're teaching your nervous system that love requires self-abandonment, and your nervous system believes you. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is not just about your thoughts. This is about the felt sense of safety in your body. You don't just intellectually believe that love is dangerous. You feel it in your breath, your posture, your hesitation to speak up. That feeling didn't begin with the last person who hurt you. It began long before that, in a childhood moment, in a subtle withdrawal, in a pattern of inconsistency. It began in those moments when love and pain arrived together, and your body learned that to be loved, I must betray myself. You want to know why you haven't been truly loved yet? Because you've been attracting from that place, that abandoned place, that aching place. And what we attract from, we recreate. Not out of punishment, but out of hope. Hope that this time it will be different, that this time if I just love better, perform harder, stay quiet longer, I'll finally be chosen. But you won't, because the real you isn't in the room. No one can choose what they cannot see. This is where your power returns, not in blaming them, not in shaming yourself, but in reclaiming your presence. You begin to notice the signals, how your body tenses around certain people, how your voice changes when you feel unsafe, how your energy contracts when you sense rejection. You start listening not to react, but to understand, not to fix, but to witness. You stop forcing connection and start observing its cost. When the cost is your truth, you say no, not out of bitterness, not out of fear, but out of love for the one person who is always waiting for you to come back. You. Jung didn't ask us to become better. He asked us to become whole, to stop striving for perfection and start integrating the mess. He believed the soul doesn't want to be fixed, it wants to be seen. That includes the anger you're ashamed of, the longing you were taught to hide, the needs you labeled as weakness, the dreams you gave up because someone told you they were too much. Integration means no part of you gets left behind. That's why your love life hasn't worked yet. Not because you're unlovable, but because you've been loving from exile, from outside your center, from the abandoned edges of your being. People can feel that. They don't respond to your words. They respond to your energy. You say, I'm worthy, but your frequency whispers, please don't leave. You say, I love myself, but your energy pleads, validate me. You say, I'm fine on my own, but your presence shouts, save me. Here's the breakthrough. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be returned to yourself, fully, fiercely, tenderly. You need to bring all your exiled parts back into the light, not with judgment but with reverence, because every part of you was created to protect you. Every defense, every mask, every reaction. It kept you alive, it kept you safe, it helped you survive in a world that taught you love was conditional. But survival is not living, survival is not love. You're ready for more. That's why you're here. That's why you're still listening, because some part of you knows that true love will never arrive as long as you're fragmented. You're done offering people pieces of yourself and calling it connection. You're done begging for someone to love you enough to make you feel whole. You're done handing over your power in exchange for temporary intimacy. You're ready to love from your center, to speak from your truth, to be seen not for your performance, but for your presence. When you get there, when you live from that embodied truth, something shifts. You stop chasing love. You stop proving your worth. You stop explaining your needs. You stop waiting to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. In that self-choosing, you become magnetic, not to everyone, but to the ones who've done the same, to the ones who don't need you to shrink, who don't punish your honesty, who don't mistake your depth for danger, who see your shadow and bow to its wisdom because they've met their own. This is what love looks like when it's built on wholeness. It's not always easy, but it's always real. It's not about being comfortable. It's about being true. That kind of love, that kind of resonance begins and ends with you. Because the truth is, most people are not afraid of being unloved. They are afraid of being truly seen. Being truly seen means your masks no longer work. Your defenses no longer protect you. Your image no longer saves you from the risk of intimacy. To be truly seen is to be vulnerable in the most sacred way. Yet this is what you crave the most. Not shallow admiration, not performance-based validation, but a soul-level recognition that says, I see you, and I'm not leaving. But that recognition cannot come until you offer it to yourself first. You must look into the eyes of your own reflection and say, I see you, the one who tried so hard, the one who fought to be enough, the one who survived by becoming whatever others needed, and I'm not leaving you either. Because your wholeness is not something you find in another, it's something you remember in yourself. Carl Jung knew that the soul cannot thrive in distortion, And distortion is what happens when you perform a self that is not aligned with your truth. You become a role, a character, a curated version of who you think you should be. It works for a while, it gains you love, applause, opportunities. But deep down, there's always that ache, that emptiness that follows even the best days, that haunting sense that no matter how much you do, it's still not enough. That's not failure. That's the call to return, to integrate, to become. You want real love? You want to be truly held? Then stop negotiating your soul for scraps of connection. Stop performing wholeness and start embodying it. Stop hiding your depth to stay acceptable to people who haven't met their own. Stop shrinking your truth into bite-sized pieces just to avoid being too much. Because here's what no one tells you. Your too muchness is only overwhelming to those who have never dared to be full themselves. You're not too sensitive, you're attuned, you're not too intense, you're alive. You're not too emotional, you're honest. These are not flaws, these are frequencies. But until you stop apologizing for them, you'll keep attracting people who need you to dim, people who love your light only when it stays small enough to keep them comfortable. That is not love. That is control dressed as connection. Jung didn't teach comfort. He taught confrontation. He taught us to face our projections, our triggers, our unmet needs, not to fix them, but to meet them with compassion. That work, it's not glamorous. It's not something you can showcase on social media. It's quiet, unseen, messy. It looks like sobbing in the dark when you finally realize you've been betraying yourself for years. It looks like ending a relationship not because you don't care, but because you care too much to keep lying. It looks like telling someone, "This is what I need," even when your voice shakes. It's in those moments, those sacred ruptures, that you begin to build a new relationship with yourself, one that isn't based on conditional love, but on radical presence, one where you no longer leave yourself even when others do, one where you no longer demand perfection before offering compassion, one where you say, "I'm worthy now," in the mess, in the middle, in the unknown, because that's the only place real love can find you, in the truth, not in the script, not in the image, not in the role, but in the raw, trembling, unfiltered aliveness of your actual being. That is where resonance begins. That is where intimacy is born. That is where everything changes. Yes, it's terrifying. To love from that place means risking heartbreak. It means letting people in where it actually matters. It means no longer having the protection of your performance. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to avoid pain, you become free, because pain is not the enemy. Pretending is, numbing is, hiding is. It is not love that breaks you, it is the absence of truth. When you understand that, you stop chasing certainty. You stop needing guarantees. You stop waiting for someone else to go first. You become the one who shows up fully, the one who loves without losing themselves, the one who holds their own hand in the dark, the one who chooses truth even when it costs connection, because they know that any connection that cannot hold the truth is not worth keeping. This is the love you've been waiting for, a love rooted in wholeness, not in lack, a love that says, "I don't need you to complete me, I want to meet you from my fullness," a love that doesn't beg, chase, manipulate or perform, a love that breathes, a love that expands, a love that has nothing to prove because it already is. And it begins with you. Not when you're healed, not when you're perfect, not when you finally figured it all out, but now, as you are, with all of it, the mess, the brilliance, the fear, the fire. Because the moment you stop resisting your own soul, love stops resisting you. But love, when you finally allow it to be what it truly is, not a reward, not a transaction, not a performance, but a mirror, will humble you. It will show you not what you want to see, but what you need to see. It will not gently tiptoe around your edges. It will illuminate the shadows within your concealed spaces. And when you're unprepared, you'll label this illumination suffering. You'll name it dismissal. You'll term it desertion. Yet it represents none of these elements. Its disclosure, and disclosure inherently disturbs it, shatters the former structure. And that fracturing, that's what you've confused with emotional devastation. Carl Jung grasped this profoundly, that the individuals who shatter your defenses aren't your adversaries. They represent your divine messengers. They arrive not to wound you, but to reveal what you've constructed your sense of self around. That's why it aches so intensely when they depart, not merely because you long for them, but because they carry away the reflection with them, and you remain with the inquiry without them. What is my identity? And if that inquiry frightens you, it's solely because you've never received authorization to respond to it without another's. Observation. So here stands your authorization now to no longer characterize yourself by who remains or who exits, to no longer mold your value around the functions you perform or the reactions you obtain, to no longer pursue security in being comprehended, but in comprehending yourself. Because when you comprehend yourself, when you examine the profundities and declare, "This represents me, and I will no longer express regret," you cease requiring the world to interpret you. You cease requiring someone to select you so that you feel authentic. The reality is most individuals aren't pursuing love. They're pursuing validation. Validation that they're sufficient, that they're deserving, that they're secure, that they're acknowledged. But validation will always remain delicate because it relies on something external. To you, love, when grounded in self-knowledge, becomes unwavering. Not because you never experience anxiety, but because anxiety no longer determines your existence. And when anxiety no longer guides your connections, transform you. Cease being attracted to individuals who recreate your early wounds. You cease experiencing attraction with those who reflect your trauma. You cease labeling disorder passion. You cease confusing unpredictability for thrill. You begin to want something more refined, calmer, profound. Not because you've surrendered, but because you've finally matured, and your nervous system, once dependent on intensity, begins to desire security, not the type that emerges from dominance, but the type that emerges from harmony, when your statements align with your reality, when your force corresponds with your core, when your existence no longer demands justification. Jung termed this individuation, not becoming superior, but becoming complete, not refining your appearance, but returning to your essence. And when two individuated individuals encounter each other, the bond feels distinct. It doesn't surge. It doesn't consume you like a blaze. It stabilizes, it broadens. It feels like sanctuary. Not because it's flawless, but because it's immediate, because it respects the complete range, because it permits the darkness into the space without attempting to repair it. And suddenly, everything you believed love was meant to be intoxicating, theatrical, filled with high risks and deep valleys, begins to feel childish. You don't desire the turbulence anymore. You desire the foundation. You desire someone who encounters you, not because they must, but because they decide, to someone who perceives you not as a remedy to their suffering, but as a partner in their growth. And you cannot discover that until you become that. So yes, you may feel isolated. Initially, you may feel the quiet more profoundly than you ever have. You may mourn the bonds that no longer align with your reality, but in that tranquility, you begin to perceive something else, your own sound. The one that's been overwhelmed by disturbance, the one that was never loud but always genuine, the one that doesn't cry for notice. It simply waits to be heard. That sound is your stability. That sound is your guide. That sound is your authentic self, the you before the world instructed you who to be. And when you listen long enough, you recall you were never seeking someone to fulfill you. You were seeking someone who didn't demand you to abandon yourself behind. But you cannot be loved that way if you are still deserting yourself, so you cease, not all at once, but moment by moment you catch yourself in the act of diminishing and choose to grow instead. You catch yourself preparing to deceive, to maintain harmony, and choose to speak the reality with compassion. You catch yourself about to pursue, and instead sit with the unease. And in those micro-decisions, something sacred occurs. You become reliable to yourself, and that more than anything is the foundation of genuine love, not attraction, not romance, not compatibility, examinations, trust. Do you trust yourself to remain, to express, to soften without dissolving, to hold space for your own feelings, without requiring someone else to mend them? Because until you do, love will always feel dangerous, not because it is, but because you're not fully with yourself in it. The path to genuine love is not constructed with grand displays. It's constructed with small choices to return home to yourself again and again, to let love rise from presence, not pressure from clarity, not confusion from alignment, not avoidance. This is the revolution: to choose love without losing yourself, to give without exhaustion, to receive without doubt, to stand open-hearted without defense, not because you trust others to never harm you, but because you trust yourself to never abandon you again. That is what makes love possible. So much of what we call love today is nothing more than mutual projection. We meet someone and without even realizing it, we project our unmet needs, our unresolved wounds, our forgotten longings onto their face. And they do the same to us. We don't fall in love with who they are. We fall in love with in part of ourselves. We believe they will finally make whole. But projection is fragile because the moment they stop reflecting back what we want to see, the illusion begins to crack, and we call it disappointment. We call it betrayal. But it's not. It's disillusionment, the removal of illusion. It's not the relationship that failed. It's the fantasy. Carl Jung warned us of this. He said, "We always see our own unavowed mistakes in our opponent, and the same is true in love. We see our unmet desires in our lovers. We don't fall for them. We fall for who we are in their presence, and that is why love built on projection cannot last, because it is not rooted in reality. It is rooted in hope, in desperation, in longing to be completed by someone else, but no one can complete what you've refused to claim. So here is the truth you've been avoiding. You are not half a person waiting for your missing piece. You are a whole being who has forgotten their wholeness, and no amount of romance, chemistry, or validation will ever substitute the reunion with yourself. Because even if they stay, even if they love you, even if they try to give you the world, you will not feel it if you are not home inside. This is why people can be in a relationship and still feel profoundly alone. This is why you can be told you are loved 1,000 times and still doubt it. Because love cannot land in a self that is closed, and we close ourselves when we reject our own truth, when we abandon our inner child, when we ignore the voice that whispers, "This doesn't feel safe just to keep someone around." Love cannot find you if you are not within yourself to receive it. And so we repeat the patterns over and over, not because we are cursed, but because the soul will keep bringing the same lesson until we choose to learn it, until we stop asking, "Why do I keep attracting emotionally unavailable people?" and start asking, "What part of me is still unavailable to myself?" Until we stop wondering, "Why do I always end up hurt?" and start asking, "Why do I still betray my boundaries to be chosen?" The pattern is not the problem. The pattern is the portal. It's your shadow, knocking not to punish you, but to awaken you. And awakening is not glamorous. It's not a sudden epiphany followed by bliss. It's a quiet, often painful process of stripping away everything false, of grieving not just people, but identities, of looking into the mirror and seeing the masks you've worn for decades, and choosing for the first time to take them off, not for someone else, not to earn love, but because you are finally ready to be real. And when you do that, when you show up without the performance, without the polish, without the perfection, something radical happens. You begin to attract differently. You stop magnetizing chaos, you stop recreating your trauma, you start feeling drawn to peace, to presence, to people who don't activate your wounds, but resonate with your wholeness. Not because they are perfect, but because you are no longer asking them to carry the weight of your healing. This is how relationships evolve, from wounds to wisdom, from codependence to collaboration, from addiction to alignment. When you meet someone from your healed space, love becomes less about what you can get and more about what you can grow. It's no longer a strategy, it's an offering. And here's the paradox. The more whole you become, the less you need love, and the more you're able to truly receive it, because it no longer fills a hole, it expands a foundation. It's not a remedy, it's a reflection of your inner peace, your self-respect, your emotional maturity. And in that kind of love, there is room for the full spectrum: joy and grief, laughter and silence, desire and fear. Nothing has to be hidden, because nothing in you is unloved. But to get there, you must become the lover you've always searched for. You must speak to yourself with reverence. You must protect your heart with boundaries, not walls. You must hold your own pain without needing someone else to rescue you. You must stop waiting to be chosen and choose yourself again and again, especially when it's hard. This is the work. This is the revolution: to love without possession, to give without depletion, to receive without guilt, to stay soft in a world that taught you to be hard, to remain open in a world that trained you to shut down, to become a safe space, not just for others, but for your own soul. And when you do, everything changes, not because the world becomes easier, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. You stop living on the surface and start inhabiting the depths. You stop grasping and start allowing. You stop fearing endings and start honoring beginnings, because you finally trust yourself to hold what matters, not perfectly, but consciously. That's the love you've been searching for, and it was never out there. It was always waiting just beneath the noise, the projections, the masks, in the quiet presence of your own heart. So this is where the journey ends, not in some grand explosion of enlightenment, not in a perfect relationship, not in a storybook ending where everything makes sense. No, it ends here, in the stillness, in the quiet, knowing that you have come home to yourself, that the love you have been seeking your whole life, the one that feels like belonging, like safety, like resonance, was never outside of you. It was the you that you had left behind, the self you abandoned while trying to be loved, the voice you silenced while trying to be accepted, the truth you suppressed while trying to be chosen. And now that you've returned, you begin to see love differently. Not as a prize to earn, but as a frequency to embody. Not as something given or withheld by others, but as something you choose to express toward yourself, toward life, toward those who can meet you there. You stop begging the universe to bring you someone who sees your worth, and instead become someone who reflects it. Because when your relationship with yourself is whole, your standards evolve, your boundaries sharpen, your longing softens, and your magnetism intensifies. Not because you're performing, but because you've stopped performing altogether. This is the paradox of love. The less you chase it, the more it reveals itself. The less you depend on it, the deeper it finds you. Not in intensity, but in honesty. Not in fantasy, but in presence. And when it arrives, not as a spark, but as a steady flame, you no longer doubt it. Because it doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't require a mask. It doesn't disappear when you show your shadows. It stays. Because you stayed. Carl Jung taught us that to be whole is to embrace all that we are, not just the light, but the dark, not just the strength, but the softness, not just the clarity, but the confusion. He showed us that individuation, the process of becoming truly ourselves, is the most important and the most spiritual task of our lives, and love, real love, is the natural result of that process. Because when we are whole, we no longer love to fill a void. We love to express truth, and that truth is unshakable. It doesn't rise and fall with rejection. It doesn't fracture under absence. It doesn't depend on perfect timing or flawless chemistry. It is steady, quiet, grounded. It says, I'm here, not because you complete me, not because I need you, but because I am whole, and from that wholeness I offer you my presence. When you love, from this place you are no longer a seeker, you are no longer waiting, you are no longer surviving, you are living, you are being, and in that being you invite others to meet you, not in fantasy, not in projection, but in reality, in humanness, in sacred imperfection. And when you are met, there's something beautiful happens. You stop fearing love. You stop fearing loss, because love is no longer something that can be taken from you. It is something you carry, something you become that is the real revolution. Not a relationship, not an external validation, but a life that is lived in full integration with your past, your pain, your power. A life where you no longer perform for acceptance, but express from truth. A life where love is not a roller coaster, but a river flowing from your center, reaching only those who are ready to swim beside you. And even if no one comes, not for a while, not ever, you are no longer afraid. Because you are not empty, you are not waiting, you are not incomplete, you are full, you are awake, you are deeply, irrevocably alive. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Indeed, but he also knew it is the most liberating, because once you accept yourself, the world can no longer manipulate you with conditional love. You are no longer susceptible to those who offer love in exchange for your silence. You're no longer seduced by chaos, masquerading as passion. You're no longer addicted to being needed. You simply are, and that is enough from this place. Every relationship becomes a mirror, but not a prison. Every encounter becomes an invitation, but not a requirement. You begin to navigate love, not as a void to be filled, but as a sacred exchange. You don't demand, you don't beg, you don't contort. You show up fully, unapologetically, with your softness, intact with your fire, alive with your heart open, but not bleeding, because you've stopped waiting to be chosen. You've stopped hoping someone else will save you. You've stopped giving your power to people who cannot even hold their own. And in that stillness, something awakens.